Turning back now to our top story, the Fed's announcement this week of a 2-month GST exemption on a slate of items from essential goods to common stocking stuffers, even Christmas trees. Is it, as the Liberals say, a holiday helping hand, in part to reward working Canadians for pulling together to weather the economy's post-pandemic recovery? Or is it, as the opposition says, a political ploy? Our Sunday strategy session is here to dig into that. Corey tonight was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Scott Reid is a CTV News political analyst and former communications director to Prime Minister Paul Martin. And Kathleen Monk is a former NDP strategist and director of communications to the late Jack Layton. Hello, everyone. Hey, good to see you. Corey, I'll start with you. Is this just crass politics, or is there something more behind it?
Well, I think it's an acknowledgement that the people are feeling the pinch of higher prices, cost of living, all of the like. We've talked about it many times on the show. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of complaints from Canadians in terms of paying less tax. Like that's something that I think is pretty universally popular out there. But I don't think it's going to do, what the government is hoping in the longer term. The aggravating factor out there for a lot of the electorate is the carbon tax, and that's going to go up this spring. So, I think, well, nobody's going to complain about this. I don't think it's really going to change the arc of unpopularity for this government.
Scott, so many times I can think of over the last few years when the government has announced something that is more targeted, the conversation that we've had is how that has also, in a congruent way, limited the political impact of what they're doing. This is the opposite of that, right? It's for everyone, a check for 18 million people. But to Corey's point, is the timing of it going to limit the political impact it potentially could have had?
Well, if the alternative is to do nothing, that's for sure not going to work. So I at least respect it and admire it as a sign of political life from the government. And, I would point out a couple things. It's big. It's, as you say, it's pretty much universal. But it is really big in its size. And one thing I've noticed is even the evening that it was announced, I'm bumping into people who are talking about it. So it's punched through. People are aware of it. Now, does that translate into votes for the Liberals? Does that mean that their electoral fortunes are going to reverse immediately? We'll see. But it clearly got on people's radar. The other thing that I noticed about it is Pierre Poilievre did not seem to like having to talk about it. He did not like the position it put him in. He did not like the idea of being able to having to say yes or no to it. It looked like somebody had ripped his friendship bracelet off. He very sour on this topic. So, if you can punch through to Canadians and if you can make the leader of the opposition uncomfortable, then that's a good day. And they haven't had a ton of good days recently. So I think full marks so far.
Will it lead to more good days, Kathleen, or what will determine that in your view?
Well, I think the Liberals are hoping that. They certainly have started their echo announcements with, sending off ministers into ridings that really count, like in Southwest Ontario. But I just don't think it's great policy. That doesn't mean that it's not great politics, right? The easiest way to a voter's heart is what? Through their wallet, and that's what they've done. But it doesn't have the long-term vision that I would like to see. I actually do like targeted programs. I know this is a debate that we've had on the show a lot, but I like targeted programs that help people that need it the most. And this doesn't have the same kind of longevity in terms of investment in infrastructure, the healthcare programs that I'd want to see or I'd champion. That said, I actually think what's most quizzical about this program is that it should have been done 2 years ago. Inflation is a government killer, and we've seen that with the Liberals. And if they had actually introduced something like this in 2022, even give them an extra year, 2023, imagine the impact it would have had. Now we've got a 2-month program that's basically through Christmas to Valentine's Day, and what will happen next? So that's what I'm looking towards.
Yeah, that's sort of like what I was getting at with my question to Scott, Corey, around timing. If I get this too, when inflation was where it was 2 years ago, 18 months ago. We're still obviously struggling with the cost of living, but does it feel like they're coming to it too late from a strategic perspective?
Yeah, I think it's anytime you get money back from the government, people are going to be grateful for it. Like tax cuts and tax abatements and checks to people, it's popular. So, I just don't think it's what has been driving the downward spiral of their political fortunes. I think that has been more related to the carbon tax, and Poilievre has clearly, stated again and again that he's going to have a carbon tax election. That's going to be one of the main points in this platform that, and it's, and it's been working. So I think, if I were advising them, I'd be saying, find something other than the carbon tax if you want to really improve your fortunes over time. But I just don't think that's going to happen.
When it does come to the Conservatives on this, Scott, I wanted to ask you, because their framing was very much like, I'll wait to see the legislation. I'm not going to decide on a press release, but we think that the best way to address affordability is through the carbon tax. When this eventually, and don't ask me how it's going to happen because it seems very complicated at this point, when this eventually does become legislation and makes it its way through the House, like, does it become a challenge for the Conservatives? Like, how do they decide what to do here? Because I feel like if they vote against it, that's a hard message to sell too.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to watch. And, that initial response of, well, I haven't seen the proposed legislation because, as you know, I'm a real grammarian when it comes to statutes. That's weak tea. I think what you'll see is the government's going to introduce this by way of the economic statement. And on the one hand, that will make it hard on the Conservatives. On the other hand, there's no way they can vote in favor of the government's economic statement. So they're not really being wedged on this. I think the government actually wants to force the Conservatives to vote against it so they can go out there and highlight that. I want to add one quick thing on the timing issue you mentioned, just speaking about what Kathleen had to say. I think as well, obviously, it would have been better if they'd done this 2 years ago. But in some respects, I wonder if this is an indication and this is a consequence of how the Liberals and the NDP have gone through a divorce. I'm not sure they would have thought to do this 2 years ago when they had that agreement with the NDP. All the emphasis and all the policy drive was toward targeted programs like pharmacare and elsewhere. And now you see the government, unlatched from the NDP doing broad-based tax cuts. I think that's a little bit of a sign of the times and a desire on the part of the government to distinguish itself from the New Democrats, to whom it's been stitched so closely for the past 2-3 years.
Except for what's so interesting in all of this, Kathleen, is when Taylor Swift was performing in Toronto, Jagmeet Singh held a press conference that no one went to because no one had cameras to send, to announce basically the principles of what Justin Trudeau then said, hey, thanks to the NDP for backing us on this one. Like, it was the NDP's idea to start with, but he's trying to take credit. Is he going to get any?
Well, I think that the point of differentiation would be when it comes to February, Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats can actually say, hey, if you like this, if you want to continue something like this, then you vote for us. Because actually the Liberals have said it's going to, whenever the election happens, because, it's going to end with the Liberals and on Valentine's Day, essentially, and the Conservatives are probably going to vote against it. Because actually, I think the Liberals might not put it actually in their federal fall economic statement. They might actually pull it out as a separate bill to get that straight up and down vote to actually wedge the Conservatives to have to vote against it. That basically Poilievre will be the Grinch that won't give people the GST off their candy or their booze. But I think the difference between the NDP and the Liberals is that, or frankly the Conservatives, is that New Democrats want to take the GST off things like utilities, like home heating, things like cell phone bills or internet.
Not Christmas trees?
Not Christmas trees, not candy, not wine and spirits, like those kind of things, things that frankly aren't essentials. Yes, take the GST off diapers. It makes no sense that the GST or taxing people with essentials like diapers, but also it doesn't make a lot of sense taxing things like cell phone bills or home heat when people need it.
We'll leave the discussion there. Thanks so much to Kathleen Monk, Scott Reed, and Corey tonight.